Hi, my name's Landon Horton, and I'm going to talk about social cognitive theory and how it relates to video games. Why it matters. More than 90% of American kids play video games, many of which portray violence in a fun framework free of negative consequences. This is important because in real life, there are consequences to violent behaviors, there's consequences to violent habits. So if you present a virtual reality to kids, sometimes they don't draw the line from their behavior to the bad results that it brings. Children are exposed to violent video games at an early age, which can desensitize them to future violence in their adult lives, as well as cause aggression in certain situations. Even without video games, in a general sense, children and even adults observe behaviors throughout their everyday lives which impact the way that they live, the way that they go through their daily lives. Social cognitive theory is a theory that describes a human experience in which observation is a method of learning. It states that human beings are inclined to imitate behavior that they observe. This theory was created by Albert Bandura, and he did a bubble doll experiment which described or which had kids um, learning and seeing things on screen, and they imitated those things, or they may have imitated a person, um, and they were seen to imitate or emulate the negative behaviors of the person who came in the room. Video games, they relate to social cognitive theory. Video games have the ability to show users an alternate virtual reality which has similarities to real life, but they present different outcomes. So when you present the virtual reality, it has similarities to real life, but it's unable to bring about the certain results that you would actually see in a real life environment. In my milestone one, I presented the evidence based argument that children are susceptible to attractiveness of characters in video games. The attractiveness that they see leads them to emulate certain behaviors, and furthermore, it can increase their aggression at an early age. Results in a Lackland study showed that children are shown aggressive characters who are humans more often than animals. This kind of shows that human beings are presented in a violent manner, obviously more than animals are. We're more inclined to emulate people who we believe are similar to ourselves. There's an abundance of aggressive models in gaming today. These models appear on a wide spectrum of violence, racial identity, graphicness, and other factors. This study showed that violent characters have the ability to pull children and adults to emulate their behaviors. Context also plays a part in the desire to be like someone who embodies a certain idea in a video game story. So obviously storylines are going to be something that entices kids or entices people to emulate those type of things because that storyline is fun for them, or it's very interesting. The effects of violent video games on humans. In a study by Lang, participants and their physiological responses were recorded. It kind of showed what happens with the body as we play video games. Specifically, balance, disinhibition, and dominance were among the vital factors that determine the feelings while playing the game and how they could model the physiological response in a real setting. Um, so basically, they recorded the heart rate, the skin conductance, and other states, which ultimately were linked to self-reported emotions. So these participants recorded their emotions while these things were going on, and they could kind of draw a picture of the human being we and how our bodies respond to the things we're seeing. In Chang's study, it aims to study younger children and their response to firearms as it relates to their exposure to violent video games. So this is more along the lines of the social learning theory, which showed that children are much more susceptible to imitating bad behaviors. Children were paired in twos and asked to watch a 20-minute clip and then directed to a room with a present unloaded handgun. It draws on the social cognitive theory and modeling, which states that humans can learn by observing. This research seeks to explain the link between accidental shootings along with the increase in aggression amongst kids. So they were presenting statistics about the accidental shootings that happened in America, and they kind of drew upon that to create this experiment in which kids were presented with violent video games and which had firearms in them, and they were given where they were put in a room with an empty firearm, and they were kind of recorded to see what how they would behave with that firearm, or if they would play with it, or if they would shoot it, or things of that nature. Why should you care? This has sparked many conversations about what age kids should be allowed to play violent video games. Evidence shows that the more you play these types of games, the more you may be desensitized to violence. That was one factor in Chang's study, was the desensitization of violence based on how often you're exposed to video games or violent games or first-person shooter games. The abundance of violent characters in video games should be of concern to you because you can paint a picture of the world to children, especially when they are constantly exposed to these video games. Video games as a media should be more monitored, and we need to be careful of what children are exposed to. Why should gamers care? Gamers should be careful of how frequently they play video games. Based on the evidence that I've shown, I feel like gamers should be a little bit more aware of how these games affect them, or how they affect their bodies, or how they affect their minds. There's a lot of content that can create a false sense of reality, and that can transpire into acting out in different ways in real life. Be aware of how you act when playing video games constantly. Constant exposure could prove to be bad for your mental health. Desensitization is a big factor also, because when you're constantly exposed to these video games, you can become desensitized to violence in a sense, because it's harder for your brain to distinguish between the game and real life. Um, Overall, as a gamer, there's a responsibility to have conversations and make sure violence doesn't begin in these certain forums. So there's forums, obviously, that exist in the video game world, and there's conversations that can be had, or when things are said, maybe you can try to diffuse situations that you may see occurring in the future. For industry professionals, I would say create more strict guidelines, crack down on age restrictions. There's a lot of kids who can enter different forums, and they may be 7, 8, 9 years old, and they're entering a world where a lot of adults are, and a lot of things that they might not understand or be able to fully synthesize in their brains. There's a lot of kids under 12 years old who are exposed to violent video games like Call of Duty. I've had experiences with this online where there may be a child who is really young, who's really exposed to these gory storylines and gory killings and things of that nature. Create a more protective video game environment, just as a movie theater would when you have movie restrictions based on age, or whether it's 18 and up or mature audiences. I understand that they have a labeling for that, but there may need they may need to create a different set of rules so that we can better monitor kids and how they respond to different video games. My conclusion is that we all play a part in minimizing violence and decreasing bad outcomes from video games. A lot of us are exposed to different medias, especially those of us who play video games like Call of Duty or GTA or things of that nature. Video game creators should create games that enhance the experience and teach good lessons, but also be aware of character creation, and what types of things are being taught. One of the main arguments that I saw was that characters are very attractive, and a lot of them are similar to kids or similar to teens, and they believe that these people are to be looked up to, or they are people um, who can be modeled after. Gamers can voice their opinions more. I feel like gamers should have more of a say in what goes on and how games are created, what characters they would like, and um, also be more knowledgeable of what is going on in the gaming world. And lastly, parents should monitor their children and talk about guns and violence. Even though some younger kids may be exposed to these things, I believe parents have a responsibility to have these conversations, especially if their kids are going to be playing games. Thank you for listening.